Greetings all, this is Rick Levine with your mid-month update for October of 2020. I'm recording this early in the morning on Monday, October 19, and we have just come out of a new moon. We're in a very strange period of time that is about a little bit less than 2 weeks to Election Day here in the United States. And astrologically, the energies are tilted pretty far out of whack. And in some ways, they are playing into the larger energies of the entire year. But in some ways, this is a pretty specialized little case we're in right now with both Mercury and Mars retrograde, and Mercury being stationary, turning direct on the morning of November 3rd on Election Day here in the United States, and then Mars turning direct about just a little bit over a week later. So we will get to all of that in a moment. What I would like to do is bring up a chart, and I'm going to just run back a couple of days ago to the new moon, and that's where we will start. Okay, so we are looking at a chart here for Friday, October 16th at noon. The new moon actually was at about 3:30 Eastern time, actually exactly 3:30 Eastern time. Today we're looking at, all the charts we're looking at are Eastern Daylight Time, and the times I'll be giving you are Eastern Daylight Time. Just to be clear, sometimes I use Pacific, sometimes Eastern. It's only fair because we have people all over the United States, for that matter, people all over the world. You others simply have to adjust for your time locally. So this new moon was pretty intense because the new moon was very closely opposed to Mars and square to the Capricorn cluster of planets, the Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, all of which are now about 6 degrees apart. This new moon was squaring right in the middle between the group closest to Pluto, but between Pluto and Saturn for that matter. And as such, there was real stress and real tension that we were being pulled here very, very strongly. On top of that, we had another opposition from Venus to Neptune, and that was also releasing to that Jupiter point in the Capricorn cluster. Very powerful situation. Also, we have Mercury here retrograding back toward an opposition to Uranus. And that Mercury opposition to Uranus actually will be exact on the 19th. We'll get to that in just a moment and why that is so significant. But bringing this forward a half a day at a time, on the 18th, we have the sun actually making its exact square to Saturn. And the sun's square to Saturn is the last of the 3 squares that the sun made, because the sun squared Jupiter, then Pluto, then Saturn. And in some ways, this may be the toughest part of the month, as the sun is forming the squares to the Capricorn planets and was opposing Mars. We are now through this. The energy should settle down a little bit, but the cosmos has a few other tricks up her sleeve before we are completely done with this. We can also see here on the new moon that Venus's opposition to Neptune is being released by Jupiter, because we're just coming off of a sextile from Jupiter to Neptune, which has been kind of feeding the visions, the hope, the potential all month. And Venus here at the new moon moving toward an opposition to Neptune and moving toward a trine to Jupiter. Let's bring this ahead to the 19th through the 18th. And now we have Venus making that trine to Jupiter at 19 Virgo to 19 Capricorn. And yet, interestingly enough, we also have here retrograde Mars backing into a square to Jupiter, which is also exact on the 19th. This is a rather big day because retrograde Mars makes that square to Jupiter, which overamps the energy. It's almost like how much is enough? Well, let's give it more. Let's expand this. Let's take this and make it even more so things can get bent out of shape by overdoing, overindulging, overexpressing, over enthusiastically being whatever it is that we are. We show up and then the volume is turned up. Now, that can be good, especially if we're in a sporting event where that Mars square Jupiter is really heightened physicality, but it can be too much. And on top of that, that Mars is also backing into a quincunx with Venus, which makes this whole thing feel not okay. There's something about the largeness of the vision of the what we need to do to go forward, and yet somehow we are hung up in narrow little specific details. And I think that Venus Mars there is kind of like a nitpicking, it's niggling, it kind of prevents us from going to the big picture. Interestingly enough, on this same day, on Monday the 19th, we also have Venus forming that exact trine to Jupiter. And so if we follow those planets around, if we just look at the Venus, Jupiter, and Mars, we can see 3 planets in a learning triangle. I know I talked about this in the forecast for the month back at the beginning of October. But this learning triangle is kind of about having to get some information right that isn't quite easily accessible, because we have the combination of this gentle, smooth, easy, opulent, pleasant Venus trine Jupiter with the too much of the Mars square Jupiter, and then the irritation of the inability to get the balance between the what we want and how we're going to get it, the Venus and the Mars quincunx. And so this quincunx trine square pattern is very important, and it really does set up energy. And part of what's being set up here is really an interesting dance, and it does take some of the pressure off this month, and goddess knows we need it. But that Venus moving into the trine with Jupiter that's exact on the 19th, then moves into a trine with Pluto on Wednesday the 21st, and then eventually moves into that trine with Saturn. And that's going to be on the 24th, which is Saturday. And so this combination of almost a week-long energy of Venus and Virgo forming successive trines with first Jupiter, then Pluto, and then Saturn is replaying some of this energy that we've had since the beginning of the year from the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And every week as the moon makes conjunctions or squares or oppositions to these 3 planets, we felt a little bit of the stirring of that tension. We'll get to the next case on that in a few minutes as the moon is heading toward Capricorn and is there by Thursday, but we'll get to that in just a moment. This week, however, we get the play of Venus taking some of that pressure off. It's almost like there's good news. There's that if we can focus, if we can make use of that Venus by getting rid of the things that are unnecessary and focusing on the things that are most important, that Venus harmonizing with Jupiter, expanding her energy, its energy, trining with Pluto, deepening, intensifying our feelings, and that becomes very, very powerful, and that is exact on Wednesday. And then by the 24th, by Saturday, Venus forming the trine with Saturn, stabilizing this energy and giving us a place to stand. And, you know, it's been really frustrating this year, because if one thing can be said, It's that we really haven't had a place to stand. It feels like we've built this entire year on shifting sands, and every time we thought something was beginning to stabilize, it destabilized, and there we were again in movement. Now, the other thing that's significant on this huge day, October 19th, today, is that Mercury is opposing Uranus. Now, this Mercury opposition to Uranus is intriguing because Mercury is retrograde. And it's intriguing because Mercury actually formed an opposition with Uranus before it turned retrograde back on October 7th. And then Mercury turned retrograde on October 13th. And now Mercury is lining up with this opposition to Uranus for the second time. And when Mercury turns direct on November 3rd, it'll be November 17th when Mercury makes that third and final opposition to Uranus. Now, here's why this is so significant, is normally Mercury transits happen for a few hours a day or two even, depending on the speed that Mercury is moving. But when Mercury is going through this direct retrograde, direct motion and goes over the same spot that makes an important aspect, it turns that fast, fleeting, transient moment of unpredictable Uranus, wild ideas, Uranus to Mercury, thoughts that are disconnected, innovative thinking, breakthrough, intellectual strikes of lightning that are like awareness, where we can see things that we couldn't see. These are cerebral breakthroughs and innovations and doing things unconventionally. Now, the important thing here is to understand that what's happening today on the 19th is not occurring in a vacuum, because it goes back to stuff that, if we look at our daytimers or our outlooks or journals, it goes back to what was going on for us back that first week in October, because the ideas and the thoughts that were being stirred up then that maybe didn't come to fruition are being stirred up again now, and they're getting a second dose of the same medicine, if you will. And it won't be until mid-November, when Mercury moving direct makes this third and final pass to the opposition to Uranus, that this phase will be tied up. So it's important not to be too frustrated if the brilliant ideas that you have don't get grounded, if they don't take form. It's okay. This is like a re-imprinting of what's already gone on, and we will all get a third and final sweep on this in mid-November. So moving this ahead, half a day at a time, we can see that the moon is also on Monday, moves into Sagittarius early in the day, very early in the day. And as such, as this, I mean, there's optimism in the air with that Mars square Jupiter and the Venus trine Jupiter, even though everything isn't seated just fine. We're coming off of a Sun square to Saturn that was exact on Sunday. And so we're still feeling kind of the pressure of the restraint of Saturn holding us back. And yet the moon's movement into Sagittarius gives us hope. It gives us a feeling like maybe we're going to get somewhere. Maybe we actually can pull this off. Maybe we can reach our goals. And so by the 20th, the moon moving through Sagittarius actually squares Neptune in Pisces, and picks up on a trine to Mars in Aries. This may be a bit confusing, but it really is still good for energy expression. I think Tuesday is a bit of an extension of the optimism and the feeling like we're moving forward that began on Monday, the 19th. By the time we get to Wednesday, though, the energy shifts, because the moon moves into Capricorn, not until mid-afternoon. So here at noon on Wednesday, it's still showing in Sagittarius. I'd have to move it to the Wednesday midday in order to get, there it is, Wednesday midday, to get to see it in Capricorn. But this is now a different flavor, because now we're reminded that whatever optimism, whatever good feelings we had, whatever reach that we had towards the sky, we now have to deal with reality. And this isn't necessarily bad, because we still have Venus making this trine today. She's making the trine, it's making the trine to Pluto. And yet we still have to get serious. We have to do what we promised. We have to accomplish the things that we've set out to accomplish, because as that moon moves through Capricorn on Wednesday, it actually, by Thursday, it will catch up to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. And of course, it will move also through that trine to Venus. And so even though the energy here is heavier, is more serious, it's back to business, it's down to business, back to work, where we really have to on Thursday refocus our energy. But at the same time, we're also getting a feeling like if we do this, then things are going to be okay. We can't miss this opportunity, because we have that Venus forming the trines here as the moon first lines up with optimistic Jupiter. Our hopes go up, and then with Pluto, there's some intensity. There's some dealing with some maybe energy of people who are in our way, or it feels like we're not going to get to where we're going to. But as long as we stay in the group mind, Moon Pluto doesn't like selfishness. This isn't about using this to get ahead personally. And then by the time that moon reaches, by the time the moon reaches Saturn, not until Friday early morning, late Thursday night or early morning Friday, depending on what time zone you're in. By the time the moon reaches Saturn, this is kind of the reckoning. We get what we deserve. Either the work that we've done is kind of beginning to pay off and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, or we may get a message from reality saying that we slipped up, we screwed up, and we need to get refocused and we need to figure this out. But that moon conjunct Saturn certainly can be a lesson, if you will, that we need to contend with. On Friday morning, the moon then moves into Aquarius. And once the moon is in Aquarius, we're getting a flavor of something different. We're getting early warnings for what could be up ahead. And of course, later this year in December, Jupiter and Saturn both move into Aquarius, and we're going to get a whole futuristic look ahead at where we're going. It's not going to happen on election day. It really won't begin to happen until we get further along in through December, when these planets begin to move into Aquarius. But today, the moon shifting into Aquarius begins to bring in some of that kind of antenna off into the future, where we can see some of the potential and some of the possibility ahead. The problem is, though, that as the moon moves through Aquarius, it's going to form a square to the Sun and Mercury. And whoops, we didn't say that yesterday afternoon on Thursday. Let me back this up just a touch here on Thursday. This is Thursday noon. The Sun is at 29 degrees and 43 minutes of Libra at noon. And by midnight, the Sun has moved into Scorpio. The Sun actually makes the shift at 6:59 p.m. and that's Eastern Daylight Time. But the reason why this is significant is that we've been in this kind of Libra sense of just trying to make everything work, trying to get some fairness and some balance. Sure, Mercury has moved on into Scorpio, but now when the Sun moves into Scorpio, it's no more Mr. Nice Guy. The gloves are off, and the battle is on. This is serious stuff, and we take a position. The extremes become more extreme. Not that they haven't been plenty extreme enough, but we also have retrograde Mercury backing into a quincunx with Chiron. It might feel that the wounds are never going to get healed. It can be a bit discouraging, but the other thing is that on Friday, once the moon moves into Aquarius, that moon is then going to pick up on squares, first to the Sun, then to Mercury, and then to Uranus. because the sun in fixed sign Aquarius is going to be squaring, the moon in fixed sign Aquarius is going to be squaring the sun in fixed sign Scorpio, Mercury fixed sign Scorpio, and Uranus fixed sign Taurus. And so what we have here is a bit of a dilemma, because our feelings are kind of maybe a little bit less intense, less passionate, and moved on off into the future. But meanwhile, we're being held by strong magnetic pull, if you will, to the extreme passionate fight, conflict that's going on in the present moment, whether that's nationally, politically, globally, or even in our own individual personal relationships. By Saturday, we come to that Venus trining Saturn that we talked about earlier. And this is the third and final trine, as Venus moving through Virgo trines each of the Capricorn planets, which has been at play pretty much all week. And this is actually good news, because again, it offers us some real stability here. It gives us a place it gives us a place where we can feel comfortable knowing that what we like, what we desire, what our values are, Venus is actually going to have some importance in the longevity, in the long haul here. And I think that this Saturday is maybe not a lot of playful energy, but it's very grounded and very positive if we can make the commitment to stick with what we need to do. Remember, Venus in Virgo likes narrowing. She likes specificity. Venus in Virgo wants us to focus our energy. By Sunday, we have Mercury retrograding back toward the sun, which is moving ahead toward Mercury. And on Sunday, the 25th, the sun and Mercury line up from Earth's point of view. That's a Sun-Mercury conjunction, happens at 2:22 p.m. Eastern time, at 2 degrees, almost 3 degrees of Scorpio. But here's the important thing to understand about this conjunction. When Mercury and the sun are conjunct from Earth's point of view, that means that Mercury is either between the Earth and the sun or on the far side of the sun. When Mercury is direct, it's on the far side of the sun. But remember, planets turn retrograde when they get closest to Earth. And so when Mercury is retrograde, which it is now, this is Mercury coming between the Earth and the sun. This means that communication is intense. It's amped up. It's jacked up. It means that we're like in rush hour right now. All the traffic is on the roads. The bridges are overloaded. Our communication lines are hot and fast. We can make wrong decisions if we're not paying attention, but we can also make use of this Mercury that is so intensely focused with the sun, our will, our consciousness. This is like a direct line with that scorpionic passionate intensity into expressing ourselves via communication, via words, via interactions with others. And it's a very, very powerful conjunction, but it's difficult to get the words out into the open because Mercury is between the Earth and the sun, and so it's hard to push the energy out to the other side of the sun. It's almost like our minds are moving so fast, the thoughts are coming and going so quickly, or our feelings or our ideas are so intense and so powerful. It's like, where do we jump in? How do we jump into that rapid flow without losing our stability? Because we have to jump into it to express it, and yet by jumping into it, that can destabilize us. So it's a bit tricky, but it's a very important communication day, and that would be Sunday the 25th. Incidentally, on Sunday the 25th in the afternoon, 5:18 p.m., the moon moves from Aquarius into Pisces, and now we go through a another round of emotionality, of feeling, of vision. Once the moon moves into Pisces, she has some very important aspects to make. On Tuesday, the moon will actually line up with Neptune, and doing such will actually deepen and intensify our dreams, our imagination. Remember, Neptune is in Pisces for the long haul. It's a little over halfway through its 14-year run through Pisces. And so the moon's monthly alignment with Neptune and Pisces is a re-imprinting of the vision of kind of an emotional connection to the soul's purpose. And yet it can be a bit confusing, especially when it doesn't conform to what's going on in our outer world. The good news, though, is that on Tuesday, the moon moving through Pisces is also going to harmonize, make sextiles with Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. And so it's nice that after getting only squares and oppositions to the Capricorn planets, we're getting a little bit of relief, and the moon sextiles are basically on Tuesday from early morning through the evening. That moon will first sextile Jupiter, then Pluto, and then Saturn. Now, the other thing that occurs on Tuesday that is hugely significant is something that I don't know that I've ever seen before. It's rather odd. I might have mentioned it in the October forecast, but on the 27th, later in the day, so it's not going to show up here until I hit midnight on the 28th. But you can see here by the middle of the day that Venus is at 29.5 degrees of Virgo, heading toward Libra. And Mercury is at 0 degrees, 28 minutes of Scorpio, but it's retrograde, heading back toward Libra. And what happens at about 9:30 p.m. Eastern time is that within 7 minutes of time, what happens is that Mercury moves into Libra and Venus moves into Libra, but they move into Libra from opposite directions to the very ending of Libra, moving backwards. That would be Mercury, and to the very beginning of Libra, moving forward, that would be Venus. Regardless, the fact is that this is, I think, a welcome moment, because the energy is heating up so much that Mercury and Venus, both moving into Libra, give us an ability to stand back a little bit and reevaluate the relationships of what's going on, both ourselves to those we love, to our family, to our friends, to our employers, to our employees, but also the relationships that we see in the outer world, the relationships between government officials and politicians, and especially those campaigning involved in the presidency, because that election from the 27th is 1 week away. On the 27th, that's a Tuesday, and election day is the following Tuesday on November 3rd. But early in the morning on Wednesday, what happens is that the moon, which has moved through Pisces, the moon actually reaches Aries. And when the moon reaches Aries, this kind of reinitiates the feistiness, the fight, the fire. In fact, this moon in Aries will join up with Chiron. It first opposes Venus. Remember, Venus just moved into Aries just hours prior, just late last night, late Tuesday night. And the moon moves into Aries at 4:44 a.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, which means that the moon opposes Venus within an hour. By 5:30 a.m., the moon is opposing Venus. And then the moon will catch up with Chiron by mid-afternoon. And in fact, the moon will eventually catch up with Mars before it leaves Aries. And so this is some intense energy. This is our feelings now are getting in the way. It might again feel like whatever healing that we had going, rather than forgiving someone, we're getting angry at them, because that Venus opposed moon is a differentiation between how we feel and how we're responding. In other words, our reactions can be different than what our real feelings are, because I know that sounds crazy, but it's like we can have some emotions, but we react in the moment and the reaction with the moon in Aries, because it's spontaneous, isn't necessarily the deeper layer of feelings. It's the flash of getting those feelings off the top, especially as that moon comes to join up with Mars, and the moon actually reaches its conjunction with Mars on Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Is when the moon actually joins up with Mars. Also in here on Wednesday afternoon, we have the sun forming a quincunx with Chiron. We talked earlier about the Mercury quincunx with Chiron. It's tough to find a place to allow healing to occur, because it's like if we show our vulnerability, it feels like our opponent or someone will just simply take that as an option and take a swipe or a hit. And so it's difficult to be soft, to be soft, to be responsive in a way that's helpful or healing. It's difficult to forgive, because it's like, if I forgive you, then you go, okay, well, see, I told you you were wrong, and smack. It just doesn't feel good, because the energy here is out of balance. That is on Thursday. By Friday, the moon moving through Aries still is at later degrees of Aries. And now the moon, having already joined up with Mars Thursday afternoon, by Friday early morning, and I mean very early morning, like 2:30 a.m., the moon makes a square with Pluto. It makes a square with Saturn by 9:30 a.m. And in fact, there was a square to Jupiter here that also occurred on Thursday night. So the moon moving through the squares to first Jupiter Thursday night at about 10:40 p.m. Then a square to Pluto very early morning hours on Friday, and then a square to Saturn, 9:30 a.m. on Friday, and then an opposition to Mercury by noon, by 12:12 on Friday. And this is a dynamic moon as it moves through Aries. It's really stirring up a lot of energy. And at 5:18 p.m. on Friday afternoon, the moon moves into Taurus, and that really helps settle that energy down, except the energy is not going to settle completely. And why is perhaps the most important thing of the month, because the end of the month, and I know I spoke about this in the forecast back at the beginning of October, because October goes out like a lion. There's a crescendo. We have the moon approaching the full moon, which is Saturday morning at 10:49 a.m., and that's Eastern time. So it's 7:49 a.m. on the Pacific coast. So I'm going to move this ahead an hour at a time so we can watch the moon moving ahead a degree every 2 hours. And there is 3 a.m. and there is 7 a.m. And we can see here that not only is the moon moving closer and closer to its opposition to the sun, to the full moon, which again, that full moon is at 10:49 a.m. Not only is it moving closer and closer to that, there it is right there within a few minutes of arc. Not only is it moving closer and closer to the opposition to the sun, the full moon itself, but it's also moving closer and closer to its conjunction with Uranus. And the moon actually conjoins Uranus just a few minutes, like moments after the full moon itself. I'm going to actually move this back to a minute at a time so we can see how crazy close this is. So here is the actual moment of the full moon itself. The moon is at 10:49 a.m. The moon is at 8 degrees of Taurus and 38 minutes. The sun is at 8 degrees of Scorpio and 38 minutes. but Uranus is at 8 degrees of Taurus in 41 minutes. It's retrograding very slowly, but that means it's moving back toward the moon. And as we move this ahead just a few minutes at a time, that moon will, in fact, jump just a few minutes, 10:55 a.m., 10:54 is the exact conjunction. At 10:54, the moon exactly conjoins Uranus. This is an extraordinary full moon. And for it to occur on Halloween, October 31st, and on the weekend prior to a presidential election, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I've given up on the prediction realms here as an astrologer. This year has just been absolutely too crazy. But I can predict that this full moon will be very powerful, and that something crazy is likely to happen. Okay, you might say, well, that's really stupid because something crazy has happened just about every day and every week this entire year, and I can't argue with you there. But this is at another level. This is when I produced the October forecast, and I called it October Surprise. It was basically leading up toward this event, toward this full moon in Taurus, which is normally stabilizing and grounded. The moon is exalted in Taurus. The moon feels comfortable. Our emotions are comfortable in Taurus because Taurus is grounded enough that it can take whatever the changes are that may come. However, the moon is lined up with Uranus, which is explosive and erratic and unpredictable and sudden and unconventional and rebellious. And it is exactly opposite the sun. The sun might have a long-term agenda. The sun in Scorpio is powerful and passionate, but the moon in Taurus can be lined up with Uranus, can release tension that's buried very, very deeply. Now, on top of that, here we also have Venus coming into an opposition with Chiron. That's actually technically not exact, I think, until tomorrow. Yeah, that's exact on the 1st. The other thing that's quite significant about this full moon chart is the proximity of the square between retrograde, almost stationary, direct, but retrograde Mercury and Saturn. So here at the time of the full moon, Mercury is at 26 degrees and 49 minutes of Libra, squaring Saturn at 26 degrees and 12 minutes of Capricorn, which means that they are just about a half a degree apart from being exact. And if we watch this Mercury over the next couple of days here, we can see that Mercury at 26 degrees and 49 minutes, 12 hours later is just moved less than a quarter of a degree. It's 26 degrees, 32 minutes. And then on November 1st, it's 26:19. And here it's exactly, this is where it moves to the exact square to Saturn. So Mercury on the 1st is exactly square to Saturn. But if we continue watching that on the 2nd, it's still square to Saturn. It's still within about a quarter of a degree. And then on the 2nd, it's still within a half a degree. And in fact, it actually stations, Mercury makes its station at 25 degrees Libra and 54 minutes. That's still a half a degree away from Saturn. And then it turns direct, but watch over the next few days. There it is at 25 degrees, 58 minutes, 26 degrees. And so it's back to being exactly square again on November 6th. And so what that really means is that from the full moon on the 31st, all the way through a few days after Election Day, because remember, Mercury is stationary direct on the morning of Election Day. Actually, it's yeah, midday on Election Day. 12:49 p.m. is Eastern time when it turns direct. But again, these planets, although we give them accurate times, it barely is moving a half a degree over the course of a week here, nearly a week. So the fact of the matter is that although we have this explosive, rebellious, radical, energy releasing full moon in Taurus, where it doesn't want to release, it wants to be stable, it wants to hold its position, and yet it's very, very unstable and explosive. At the same time, we have the Venus opposite Chiron, which is seeking forgiveness, seeking healing, seeking health, but it seems like it's far away. And then at the same time, we have this almost stuck position between Mercury and its square to Saturn. Now, remember, all through these last months, Mars moving direct in Aries squared the planets in Capricorn. And that actually, began back in September and was playing on through October. And then when Mars turned retrograde, Mars basically has retrograded back through the three of these planets. Its square to Jupiter was the third and last of the three, connections backwards. Now into this, Mercury makes a retrograde back to squaring to Saturn, but it doesn't retrograde back far enough to hit Pluto or Jupiter. It only hits Saturn, and then it turns direct, and it hangs out with that Saturn for the whole week around Election Day, which again leads one to believe that Election Day is not going to be very clear. It's not going to be a decisive day, even if it ends up looking decisive for one candidate or another, because that Mercury is stationary and it's squaring Saturn. The structure itself is going to have some systemic issues involved with it, whether they're real or imagined. I can't say, but I can say that that Mercury backing into that Saturn is significant, and yet it's not the final issue about all the Capricorn stuff, because we really have to wait for Mars to turn retrograde on November 13th. And then as Mars begins to build speed, Mars will move through a square first to Pluto on Christmas Eve on the 23rd of December. And then it will move through a square to Saturn on January 13th, 2021. And then Mars will move through its square to Jupiter on January 22nd. And it really won't be until Mars is free of that energy and through those squares that this whole time period, whatever this time period is actually put to rest. And so I'd like to have more finality for you by the end of the month. All I can say is that, hold on to your hats, this October surprise. I will be surprised if there's not a surprise. And it may not be timed exactly to the full moon, but we have some craziness that we have to go through. Not that times aren't crazy enough already. And we need to see it through to the other side. And in closing, I'm going to say something that I've said before. I've drawn heat from some people, and that's okay. I don't care who your preferred candidate was for president of the United States, whether that candidate is running or not. The choice here is not about voting or not voting, or about voting for the lesser of two evils, or about sticking with the candidate of your choice. The choice that we have to make right now, if you are one of those many people that I would include myself in, that really feels like we are at an opportune point to make huge systemic changes in the US government as we come around to our Pluto return, and we either reinvent ourselves and evolve, or the country begins to go on a more obvious path of disintegration. If you are one of those people who believe that systemic change is necessary. The question you need to be asking yourself is, would I rather be working for systemic change, for powerful, profound, radical, evolutionary change in an environment that is run by a bunch of corrupt, inept, corporatocracy, kind of mediocre people who are just not quite getting it right? Or would I rather do that under a fascist, militaristic, suppressive fascist government? That's the choice you need to make. And I know people will differ with me and people will say different things. That's my perspective. As an astrologer, I must bring my perspective, my truth to the table. If I didn't, I would not be serving my clients well. I would not be doing my job well. You do not have to agree with me, but that's what I believe, and I believe that very strongly. I will see you all again for the November forecast. It will still be pre-election day. I will probably do for my Patreon folk, of which you are. This is not a publicly distributed one, although, as you know, you're welcome to share it with your friends and family. But I will probably do another update on or the day after Election Day. But what's going to happen? I don't have a clue. See you on the other side, and keep breathing, keep moving forward, and vote. I'm Rick Levine. Think cosmically, act locally.